Back in the day, as the younger generation likes to say, Mark Brayshaw would have been the classic jack of all trades. An AFL player, club official and board member, and now the boss of the Coaches Association. Yet his toughest job has just started, the emotional roller coaster following the fortunes of 3 sons at different AFL clubs. He also happens to have a 4th son, his eldest, on the ground with the Australian forces in Afghanistan. Hardly a sedate life in middle age, Mark.
I'm very lucky, Mike.
You are. High achievers, all of them.
So far, yeah.
Yeah. What about their father?
All my friends that I played footy with and went to school with are speculating. There's 2 theories that they apply, Mike, one of which is that all the boys have thrown to the dam. The other is that whatever they've got skipped my generation from my dad. So,
well, you do come from good stock. Your father, Ian, was a state cricketer and a premiership player in the Waffle.
Yeah. He was very good. And my brother and I, oldest brother.
Your brother James?
Yeah, playing footy and cricket and hanging around, particularly at the Wacker. So yeah, we were sort of sports brats, and I suppose there must have been a genetic predisposition towards, because James was a very good cricketer, and I was at the very least a very enthusiastic footballer, and yeah, I'm a very lucky man.
Well, we'll get back to the kids, but I want to ask you about your football. You were drafted by North Melbourne in 1989, I think, at number 6. So they obviously saw something in you.
I was a bit late. I was pretty immature as a young guy, and took a little while to find my feet. Jared Neesham arrived and inspired me to be as good as I could be, and then I got drafted and Greg Miller called out my name. I was, you know, those days North were a very low profile club, but my brother was just mad North Melbourne. So the chance of going to Arden Street, I mean, I just wanted to come to Victoria, but he was particularly pleased that I got drafted to North. And in those days, the only player that I really knew was Jimmy Cracker, because of course as a West Aussie, you know, kept an eye on him. And it was a thrill, it was an unbelievable thrill. Didn't really, as a player I made a good director at North Melbourne, but it was a wonderful couple of years.
Well, only 32 games, given the faith that they've invested number 6 in you, picked number 6, you only lasted 3 years and 32 games.
Yeah.
Was it a fair decision when they decided to delist you?
Oh yeah, I was. Look, I wasn't good enough, simple as that. I also, my career's just, I started when professionalism was coming in, and I was not a very professional player, and not many at the club were, but I didn't have the ability. I needed to be as professional as humanly possible to optimise my career. So I look back now and think to myself, well, if I had done things a lot better, I might have been able to play a year or 2 longer, but no, the club, they certainly didn't miss me.
Is it true that you were runner-up in the Sandover medal?
Yeah, and look, I took a little while to find my feet at Claremont, and then when Jared arrived, his position was, if you're good at whatever you're good at, you need to be as good as you can be. And I was, that stage I played in a key position. We had a really good side, and with a game to go, I was winning the Sandover medal in '89, which is, it's quite remarkable. Your
father was an outstanding sportsman, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, we mentioned about the football, playing in a premiership team for Claremont. You played state cricket for year after year, and happened to take 10 Victorian wickets in one innings.
Wonderful story. So my dad played 101 first-class games for WA, and started in the 60s and finished in the 70s. So as I said, James and I grew up, and my sister and little brother, but they were a bit younger when he was playing, in an environment where he was an athlete first and a journalist second. And in those days, Test cricket was nowhere near as prevalent. It was still the pinnacle, but they didn't play as much Test cricket. So Sheffield Shield cricket was massive. We grew up going to the Wacker all the time, and there was full houses. And on this particular day when he took 10, I was only a baby, but the Victorians arrived at the Wacker expecting to break the current world record for a first innings score, 1107. Victoria versus New South Wales in 1920 odd. And they arrived reasonably confident based on the strength of their batting lineup, and in light of what they thought was a pretty soft West Australian bowling attack, although Graham McKenzie was the opening bowler, expecting and having announced that they were going to have a crack at this world record. And
they announced that, did they?
Yeah, the West Australians knew, and the media got a hold of it.
This is the Victorian team including Stackpole and Cowper and that ilk?
Yeah,
Laurie, yeah. Anyway,
shortly into the second day's play, they were all out, 161. Dad took 10 for 44, and I hope this is true, because if it isn't, it's still a good story. But the ABC commentator welcomed the Eastern States listeners just after lunch, with news that Victoria have fallen short of their pursuit of the world record by 941 runs, and Ian Brayshaw has taken 10 for
44.
10 for 44, yeah.
What about your boys? You've got to be proud of having 3 boys on 3 AFL lists. But more recent times, there's been some things that would shake your confidence, and certainly I think of Deborah, their mother.
Yeah.
I mean, with Angus is wearing the helmet because of bouts of concussion, and Andrew got that very much well publicised broken. Was it a broken jaw?
Yeah, there's the mandible,
Yep.
and then there's a thing called an alveolar or something or other beneath the teeth in the mandible, and that's what he broke. So Deborah, it's interesting you ask about her. When the boys were teenagers and playing footy, she became less and less comfortable watching them, to the point where she used to find it unbearable and used to walk away. And I remember saying to her one day, you know, what's going on? I don't remember you like this when I was playing, and I was playing against men. And she looked at me and said, yeah, but I don't remember you going for the ball as hard as they did. I'm sure she didn't mean to sort of put the dagger in, but that's her response. So I suppose she feels different about the boys, and fair enough about her husband. But Angus's journey has been up and down in the injuries, and I think he's had a handful of concussions. He's got 1 or 2 as a schoolboy, and my attitude was very different from Deborah's. I mean, she was nurturing, and and mine was from, well, you'll be right, get back on the horse, and lots of my friends have played and got concussed and get on with it. So that was a coming together. But yeah, it's been quite stressful for Deborah in particular.
I'm sure there were lots of talks around the kitchen table about, you know, the impact on him and his long-term health. Was Deborah ever of the view that he should not go on, that he should give it away?
No, but we both, the last one that he had, he was particularly distraught and concerned, and I can remember being in the rooms at Coburg when, you know, he had another concussion, and he was upset by the prospect of that, and you could just sense it was wrapping over him. And after a little while, we ended up at the Melbourne Footy Club, Brendan McCartney and Z, the doctor, and Deborah and me. And we talked about it, and the demons were wonderful, you know, the medical, and the reason I mentioned, well, there was 2 of them, the doc and Macca, but the doctor explained that the recovery was going to be modular. In other words, you stay in a dark room until you're okay, and then when you're okay to that, then you can start walking, and when you don't get a headache walking, you can start to jog, and then you can run, and you can do competitive, and eventually the doctor said he'll tell us when he's ready. And in the meantime, he's getting neurological assessments and so forth. So at the time I was watching that thinking, this is all excessive. He needs to get back on the horse, because he was stressing, and you could sense that he was flat. Separate to that, Macca was helping him, and I'm sure Simon Goodwin gave him, you know, an old experienced coach this task of teaching him better techniques and better awareness and so forth. And I'll never forget the doctor said to both of us, he'll tell us when he's ready. And early on he was nowhere near it. And I'm not helping by saying, come on, you'll be right. And I'm highlighting all my mates that played in the 80s and that got lots of concussions. Darren Steele is his best mate's dad and a really close friend of ours. And I said, he's got a great job, and you know, people have been playing footy for years. It's not boxing or it's not gridiron. Get on with it, which was very counterproductive. So if anybody's listening and have got a kid that's concussed, take your time. That's the message. Because in the end, the doctor at the Demons was spot on. I liken Angus to a dog in the back of the car, just arriving at the beach or at the park, tail wagging, tongue hanging out, spinning around in the back seat at the excitement of getting out and having a run around the beach. And that's what he was like. When he was a week away from playing, he was like that dog. He gave his mother a big hug and said, one more sleep for a game against Casey. And, you know, 2 or 3 months earlier, he was dour and sad and worried about whether it was all going to finish for him.
OK, the helmet. I suspect that Deborah was in favour of it.
Yep.
Not sure that you or Angus would have been.
So there's a good story about the helmet. The boys all went to Haileybury. Stewie Lowe has a son, and he went to Haileybury, and my 4th son and Stewie Lowe's boy are good mates. And Nathan Burke came on the scene helping out as a sort of a consultant to the footy program at Haileybury. And Stewie put Angus and Berkey together, and Deborah, and the 3 of them had breakfast one morning, and Nathan Burke told Angus his experience, which started out with lots of delayed onset concussions until such time as he was told, we can't pick you anymore because you keep knocking yourself out. So he put the helmet on. There was a bit of a debate about whether the helmet was a waste of time, you know, in fact counterproductive because it expanded the size of your head or gave players an extra confidence to go in, which... So anyway, Nathan just put all that aside and said, I put a helmet on and that was the end of my problems. And he said to Angus, if I was to punch you in the head right now, would you like to have a helmet on or off? And Angus said, I think I'll have a helmet on. He said, well, put the bloody thing on, and you'll never... And he's never looked back. And in fact, the first game he played was against the Saints, and he and Kobe Stevens banged heads, believe it or not. Stevens sadly popped his eardrum, but Angus played on. There's a great scene of Max Gawn giving the clip and saying, "Get on with it." It was just remarkable. So we're very pleased he's wearing a helmet, and Deborah in particular would like to see it for the rest of his career.
So what about kids and their sense of fashion? Was Angus reluctant to put it on?
Yeah, I think he was. But Nathan Burke was fabulous. He said, "It is hot. You do struggle when it's windy. You know, you'd rather not wear it, but don't worry about it." I got to the stage where the trainer ran out and give it to me, and it's fine. And Angus has well and truly moved past that.
Let's turn to Andrew and that terrible incident in the game against West Coast.
Yep.
You were applauded universally with your attitude to it and your sympathy and empathy with the Gaff family after that.
So I believe, yeah.
Yeah, I must say, I thought you went over the top. And it was interesting that Angus reacted far more violently than you did about what happened to his brother.
Yeah, well, it's a long story. And so Deborah and I were first of all, we were in the ground watching it, okay? And that was enormously beneficial. We were so lucky. There's a lot to be lucky about. And if we were in Melbourne at home watching the Fox replay time and time again, the first we would have seen of it was then, and there was nowhere to hide, and more importantly, nothing to do. So Deborah, very shortly afterwards, was able to be on the spot, which was a break for us. When we saw it, we were 100 odd metres away and couldn't see it. So I didn't really know what had happened, and funnily enough, Deborah was watching Melbourne play on the AFL app, run out of batteries, because Angus was playing at the same time. And so I had a little bit of battery left on my phone, and when Andrew got hit, I assumed he'd be all right, go and get some stitches, come back. And Deborah looked at me and demanded the phone, and I refused to give it to her because I wanted to preserve the batteries. Anyway, after 4 or 5 minutes, when he hadn't come back, she looked at me and it was just give me that phone, and I fired it up, and there was a couple of nasty texts by that stage from friends. And
about the seriousness
about
of
the
it.
severity of it, those of whom that were not there, and I looked at that and she did as well. And then the club doctor rings. Now, the club doctors at footy clubs are 18 or 36 very unique people. The guy at Freo, Ken Withers, I used to work at the Dockers and he was there then, so I've known him a long while, been around a long, long time, and they have this calming way of dealing with stuff. So he said, "It's Ken Withers here. We have called an ambulance. We think there might be a broken jaw. His teeth aren't, he's had his teeth pushed back, but he's not too bad, and I'll put him on." And when Ken said he's not too bad, and I know this sounds callous, but having been in footy a long while, when a club doctor says it's not too bad, and Andrew was quite defiant when I spoke to him, I thought, great. You know, I took a lot of comfort out of Ken's diagnosis because he's been around a long, long while. Deborah, on the other hand, was quite upset, grabbed my phone and left. And so I spent the rest of that quarter in amongst some of the Dockers. I was sitting next to the Giros, you know, I'm just getting to know, and all eyes were looking at me in a sense because they'd slowly but surely realising something had gone wrong with Deborah leaving. And I watched the rest of the quarter, and I was watching Andrew Gaff in particular, and you could just see that he was in a dreadful space, didn't want to be there. His body language was bloody horrible. And one by one you saw Dockers players coming off the bench and making a beeline and whacking him. And all the Eagles people could steadily become aware of this as well. Nothing on the big screen. And then I could sense that it was about to get out of control. Just before three-quarter time, the club came back and gave me the phone, and I saw for the first time what had happened. And at that stage, there was almost the Eagles players had come out and were standing, a little like a schoolboys game. They were standing in position, just waiting for the opposition to come out. And Ross was speaking to the Dockers players, and I thought great leadership, because I've subsequently found out that they were irate and really incensed and wanting to take revenge. And Ross hosed them down. And I started thinking about all sorts of things, such as it's a derby, and this will be in because I'm a West Australian, as you know, so this will be part of the derby narrative. This young man has got free agency. This might be his last game. He's going to miss the finals. Who knows about the Brownlow? The social and accredited media in Perth will just feast on this. And then I started thinking about his mum and dad, because as a parent of a footy player, you really have this friendship within the parent group. We haven't yet got it at West Coast because Hamish hasn't played yet and they live in Perth, and we're starting to get it for Fremantle. We've certainly got it at Melbourne, where you really ride the highs and lows of the boys, and you become friendly. And I suddenly thought to myself, as I sat there all on my own, this is, this. Oh, and by then I'd started getting texts, and Don Pike, Alistair Clarkson spring to mind. Both of whom said, Pikey said, this, for what it's worth, this is really out of character. So I bearing in mind what Ken Withers said, I felt like, okay, well, he's okay, and then I could see it unravelling. And then I got in the car after the game with my son Hamish, who's an Eagles listed player, and he drove us home. And he said that Andrew Gaff, if you had have asked me at the beginning of the game this was going to happen, he'd be the last guy to do it. Yeah, you can see how...
The pain on his face there.
He said he was distraught and inconsolable in the rooms. And Hamish said, look, I've seen it. It's not particularly nice, but I think Andrew might have lowered his, So we
Your Andrew.
Yeah, my Andrew. So we got home. By that stage, everybody was saying, Andrew Gaff's the nicest guy, you can't believe he did it. Hamish described him as one of his best mates, and together with Shannon Hearn, the last guy on the list, he'd think about it. And we watched and watched and watched, and you could just see my Andrew spread his legs ever so slightly, lower his centre of gravity, and put his mouth where his chest was. So once that happened...
So you believe that?
No,
you
no
believe
question. No question.
That your boy dropped his...
Unquestionably.
Okay.
And
so you think Gaff was aiming for his chest?
No doubt. And that's a separate issue, but no doubt. And some people like you have said, boy, you were magnanimous and all the rest of it. But that magnanimity was on the basis of an accident. If Andrew Gaff had have lined my Andrew up and punched him in the face deliberately, there would have been none of that. And all the talk about he would have had what was coming to him. But I felt 100% convinced, chiefly because of Hamish's friendship and what I saw in the video, that it was a garden variety accident. And at that stage, I started, Deborah and I, particularly in light of by then we'd spoken to Ken Withers a couple of times, and we started feeling for the Gaff family and particularly young Andrew.
Notwithstanding all that, you don't need to be reminded about how he looked, but when you see this, when you see that's your boy with his face just mangled, I must say, when your sense of figure, you were like Mother Teresa with Andrew Gaff. Now, I have no issue with him, and I accept the view that he's a good kid and it was out of character and it was probably an accident. But that's the result of it.
Well, a funny story. I'm running around the world telling everybody that he'll be fine and it's not the end of the world and it's 3 weeks and, and bearing in mind what Ken told me. And I'm trying not to be flippant or callous, but footy is not working in a library or in a building like this. It's a game where it can be violent. And at the end of the day, he's going to miss 3 games and he'll be fine.
How are his teeth?
His teeth, there's 5 of them that are dead.
Dead?
But they could, the dentist said he could live with them. But Andrew did say at one stage, Dad got no idea. Here am I, drinking through a straw, taking pills, waking up, can't sleep, got, lip exploded and wire that's driving me mad, and he's telling the world that I'm...
So was he angry with you?
A little bit, yeah.
Was he?
Yeah. But I also, I understand that, but I also, we've always brought the boys up to, you'll be right, get on with it. And I hope this is the worst thing that happens to him in his career. If he has a long career and as he does, then he'll be, next time something like this happens, he'll be tougher and stronger and he's in great hands. That's the other thing. The footy club, the way in which the Dockers and the Eagles have responded to this has just been magnificent. And it's not, like, for example, shortly after that, on a Sunday night, they were in a clinic with 2 experts operating and fixing him, And if you and I had that, we'd have to wait in the queue and turn up a week or 2 later. And so the Dockers and all the clubs are terrific at rallying the resources, and he's in very, very good hands and he'll be fine.
But if he hadn't have been punched in the face, Mark, none of this would have happened.
Yeah, true.
And how did it sit when you saw what Angus said? Angus was angry, huh? And he voiced his anger. It was almost diametrically opposed to your view.
And don't worry, my mother was a little bit like you as well, suggesting that I'd forgotten that Andrew Gaff was not my son and Andrew Brayshaw was. And I'd respect everybody's view. And Angus was, he was raw and it was great. I mean, he's a brother. I'm not saying I'm right. And my interpretation was different from Deborah's as well. She was much more feminine in her response, but it's just how I felt. And I kept getting asked by people, lots in the media, how do you feel? And that's just how I felt. I felt that my bloke will be all right. With all due respect to Angus, he's a young bloke with it all ahead of him, and he's entitled to react like that for his brother. But I'm 52 and I've seen a bit of it, and I'm very comfortable that my Andrew will be fine, and I'm hoping that Andrew Gaff will be too.
You're very noble about that. What did you think when you read that Paul Gaff, Andrew's father, was in hospital with a serious heart condition?
Terrible, terrible.
That in itself, of course, that in itself is terrible. But did you think that what happened in the previous week would have any effect? Would have contributed to that?
Look, I'd want to be careful how I answer this question. I've got no idea. I'm not a doctor, but I intuitively think there might have been some sort of something. It couldn't have helped, put it that way. And I can only imagine that young Andrew was thinking, goodness, you know, in addition to all the other grief that this has given rise to within my family, yeah, Dad's sick, really sick. So yeah, terrible, terrible. And that goes back to the point I made earlier about the kinship you have with the parents. We'd had a dinner earlier, the Eagles had a dinner for the Victorian parents, and we hadn't really got to know Paul and Susan, but we'd spent an hour in their house under tough times, and a week later, Paul's in hospital.
I want to talk about your other two boys. Hamish is at West Coast, hasn't played a game, but I remember the unbridled joy on your face and the tears from Deborah when he was drafted, I think, number 68.
Yeah.
And he got an opportunity to join his brothers.
Yeah, so we went to the draft. Look, the AFL, I'd be nothing without AFL footy. I just want to say that, and I'd like to think this makes the cut, by the way. I've played and I'm lucky enough to be employed and involved, and as a director for 8 years, you volunteer your time and give back, but the ledger is in my favour, there's no question. And some of the highlights have been two of the highlights have been going to the draft. They get the parents from what they think will be the top 10. We did it to the Gold Coast with Angus, and then a couple of years later with Andrew. So we went to the Western Sydney for the draft night, knowing that Andrew would go in the top 10 and hoping that Hamish would go in the bottom 10. And in actual fact, as we walked over, Andrew said to Deborah, you know, I hope this is not going to be much fun if Hamish doesn't get drafted. So we get to 67 or whatever it was, and I said, look, this is his first live pick, West Coast, because they'd suggested that they were interested in him. And they'd said, there's one kid we think might still be there, and if he is, we'll probably take him as a rookie. So we get to pick 67, and I elbowed Deborah and said, this is the first live pick, which a long, long time after pick 2. And the thing says, West Coast's on the clock, and I'm assuming that whoever that kid was, if he was still there, bingo, they'd pick it straight away. But it kept on going, and it went for a minute or so, and I started thinking to myself, gee, this is auguring well for Andrew. And then Andrew Dillon walked out, and he had this silly little smirk on his face, knowing that it was a feel-good pick, and it was Hamish. And yeah, it was wonderful.
Now, the forgotten boy, I know he's not forgotten by you and Deborah, but Will's in Afghanistan. I sensed when I was trying to coerce Deborah into coming onto the show that Will is her major concern.
Yeah.
Because he's in a war zone, isn't he?
You mentioned it a minute ago, a lot of people say, oh, you must be proud about the 3 boys on the lists. And I haven't been able to come up with a word yet, because I'm proud of William. I love the fact that the boys are playing league footy and we get to go and watch, and it's a privilege and a thrill. But I feel most proud about William. So he came home from school in year 11 and said, I think this is something I'd like to do, become an officer. It's a great career. It says, you know, you get paid, you get out in the outdoors and you get wonderful leadership skills, and he could not be happier. And then he did pretty well. Duntroon is a brutal 12 months, and he was at the sharp end of it, which meant that he had all the options within the Defence Force. And I said, I'll get into logistics, and you'll set yourself afterwards and keep yourself out of harm's way. And he came back and said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm actually good at this, and if it's not me, it's someone else. So I'm going to do it, and I love it. And he's in the infantry, and he's in Afghanistan, and it's he's in like a security mission. So he tells me that it's pretty line and length, and safe, but he has aspirations down the track to continue his career, and who knows where that'll lead. But it's well, look, I'm not a particularly social media guy at all, but there's a thing called WhatsApp, and all the 6 of us are on it, and he's always contributing, particularly with footy, and the Andrew Gaff incident, he had a fairly strong opinion. Yeah. So it's not like it was the last century where you couldn't speak to your boy, but he's there until March.
Everything on the surface seems to have unfolded perfectly for the Brayshaw family from your father down, but there was a black moment when your sister Sally died. She died in Melbourne. House bricks fell on her during a renovation. That must have traumatised the family.
It did. she tried to shut the roof of an old garage door and the bricks fell from the lintel. So I spoke to Harry Unglick, who was a club doctor, and he said she wouldn't have felt anything and would have gone out like a light. So that was a great comfort. The footy community was just unbelievable, that Claremont and North Melbourne and the AFL community wrapped around all of us in particular, which was fabulous. And Choco Williams and Choco worked at Port with me, and his brother died almost in very, very similar circumstances. And amongst all these well-wishers, Choco sent me a text, "Only the good die young," and I suddenly thought, bloody hell. And so he and I went and had a coffee just around here, not far from the studio, and talked about it. And of all the well-wishers that I had, the fact that we were able to talk to one another with such spooky, similar experiences, and we then started talking about our parents, and he gave me some really practical advice, and he and I are tight, but gee, that was important. So, yeah, my sister was in her 30s, had lived an extremely busy life, almost as if it was predetermined that she wasn't going to live very long. She'd travelled the world and done all these wonderful things, and had these experiences that you know, as I said, you'd live like you're going to die tomorrow, dream like you're going to live forever.
A famous story about your three boys, the footballers, doing 100 repetitions of 100-metre sprints on Christmas morning every year. Is that true?
That's true. It's my fault because I told them that when I grew up in Perth, Barry Cable apparently used to go for a punishing, brutal run on Christmas Day in Perth to try and get the edge on Billy Walker. So I said to the boys, if you really want to you know, optimise your talent, you've got to work hard, and I said, anyway, so they do it. They do 100 hundreds. It's blisteringly hot. Well, 2 or 3 of their mates come along. They did it in Vietnam this time, and they're going to do it as a fundraiser for the Hampton Rovers.
Are they?
Over Christmas Eve, I think, this year. But yeah, it's part of the routine, and it's almost, it's a good luck charm.
And do you supervise it?
I stand there and run the water out, but Angus has got the watch. And
so there's 35 seconds between repetitions?
Yep.
And when did this start?
And about 4 years ago. And they do it when they get to whatever their ATAR score is, so 96, I think. They have to really go flat chat.
What, you mean that one of them was bad enough to get a 96?
Yeah, well, they got in the 90s. So, yes, anyway, yeah, it's a badge of honour. You
had three years at Richmond as CEO?
Yep.
Did you get a load of something that you didn't order one day?
Yeah, we had a game at Geelong, dreadful. Richmond at Geelong was a notorious hotspot. We're beaten by, I think, 100-odd points. And the lady at the reception said there's a guy with a truckload of chicken manure out the front, and every camera known to man. So anyway, we dealt with that. Danny Frawley, the interesting story is Danny wanted to kill this guy. And Spud, he's a big man, back at this 7 or 18 years ago, even bigger. Veins in his neck, and so he pulled the guy in, and I had to sort of hose him down a little bit, and the bloke got out on the banjo and shoveled it all, but it was a moment of infamy. A friend of mine rang me from interstate and said, that guy with the chicken shit, he didn't deserve to be confronted by you wearing that cardigan. Poor cardigan. It was freezing cold in those days.
Your fashion sense has often been queried, hasn't it?
Indeed.
Well, it's been an eventful life, Mark. You've packed a lot in yourself. The Brayshaw family have been entitled to be very proud of what they've done, and it's great to catch up.
Thanks, Mike. Very lucky.